Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And let's say hello straight away to Andy Slaughter, the Labour MP for Hammersmith, who supports the campaign to remain in the EU, and Kwasi Kwarteng, the Conservative MP for Spelthorne, who supports the Leave campaign. Welcome to you both. Andy, can I just pick up on those thoughts we've just been hearing there? What Labour needs to do. What does Jeremy Corbyn have to do over these last few days to help you win the Remain campaign?
I think Jeremy's setting exactly the right note, which is to say, emphasising the positive reasons that will go down well with Labour voters about why we should stay in the EU, which is to do with protections, environmental protections, protections at work, social protections, the things that we benefited from, and which effectively protect ordinary people from, you know, the ravages of capitalism, or the worst that the Kwasi can do to them. Yeah, but at the same time, I think people know that Jeremy's sincere on Europe when he says, yeah, but there are problems there. And I think that hits the right note, and it hits the right note, and I think they know that he's being very genuine about it.
And Kwasi, you're on the other side from your leader. How do you think he's been managing the campaign? And the message today was, you know, don't take the risk. But in the round, how has the campaign been?
I think the campaign clearly is rattled. I think the edge is still probably a little bit with Remain, to be honest. But I think clearly they are very worried that this referendum won't go their way. And of course, the Prime Minister started saying, the campaign saying no blue-on-blue attacks. And then, of course, you saw quite, you know, strong attacks on Boris Johnson, on his personality, on his ambitions last week. So clearly there's been a shift in that. And I think that, you know, the Remain campaign is quite worried. And therefore we are hearing more personal attacks. OK, well, let's get into some of the detail. One of the areas, of course, is, well, when you ask people where the strongholds are, if you like, for the Leave campaign, some people say Essex, some people suggest parts of Kent, some people suggest disaffected voters in northern towns, disaffected Labour voters, you could argue. But according to some research we've seen, the place with the strongest yearning to leave the EU is the East London borough of Havering. Andrew Cryan reports from there.
While opinion polls tend to suggest that Londoners are leaning more towards in than out, according to one bit of research, East London's Havering wants to leave the EU more than any other part of the country. And earlier this year, the council even became the first in the country to officially pass a motion that backed Brexit. So if this really is the most Eurosceptic place in the country, the question is why? First things first, much of Havering looks and feels much more like the English countryside than its capital city. Half the borough is protected greenbelt land, and until the 1960s, it was officially classed as Essex rather than London. Many locals still feel their old identity, and Raymond Keary is one of them.
I feel Essex because historically, I think of the boundaries being the parishes, and they're all within, Royal Borough, really, of Havering in its time. So, no, there's some super little villages still left.
But whether London or Essex, Havering is most definitely in England. In Romford Market, flags are on proud display, along with Vote Leave banners.
Out. 100% out, yeah.
100%?
Yes, yeah, definitely. No, I'm definitely out.
You're definitely out?
Definitely out.
It's all the housing and benefits. I think we are losing control.
It's all these criminals that are coming in. We've got no way of controlling them, no way of knowing where they are. They disappear. So, yeah, and no border security.
I think we will put the Great back in Great Britain.
Now, we've been in Romford Market talking to people for probably about an hour or so, and there's been a couple of people who didn't know which way they were going, one person who said they weren't going to vote, but apart from that, absolutely everybody has said that they want out of Europe. The reasons as far afield as the price of houses, the quality of schools, the state of the NHS, the state of Romford Market. It's almost as if leaving Europe has become the answer to almost every political problem. 5 generations of the Robbins family have worked in Robbins Pie and Mash. They're now joined by 15 Lithuanians. Like many locals, this business started in the East End, but moved out to the Essex-London borders.
According to matriarch June, that migration eastwards explains why Havering people feel so strongly.
They've moved out of the area where they've been living and brought up because they've been almost, you could say, forced out because of others moving in. You see, and in Upton Park, where I was brought up, I'm very proud to be English. And this shop's very clean, as you've seen. You've just eaten it from it. It's beautiful and clean. Anywhere you look, there's got no dirt. But they live different to us. There's no hygiene. It's squalor. They gut their fish, gut their chickens, all drops on the floor, on pavement, because Queen's Road Market has not got no area for where the shops are and the stalls are. All falls on the floor. They lower the tone. Lower the tone, so if we control our borders, we can't get them people out now because they're already in.
But of course, not everybody here feels the same way about immigration. But others did tell us that they were worried about a loss of British identity.
I'd like our old values back, the British values.
Everyone you talk to, they say it's not Britain now. It's not
class
Britain.
myself as European, told I'm British, I'm English, and that is it. I don't want to be European. I want this country, I want the country back.
There's no question that there's a lot of support on the ground for leaving the EU in Havering. But we'll have to wait until the referendum results to find out if it really is the most Eurosceptic place in Britain.
Kwasi, understand the concerns expressed out there? Do you think that's widespread in London, or does it only reflect a kind of fringe?
I think Havering has a particular character, clearly, that came out in your video, in your clip. But I was in my constituency all day yesterday, which is just outside the Greater London boundary in Spelthorne. We had a great tea parties celebrating Her Majesty's 90th, and pretty much everyone I spoke to, probably out of about 20, were going to vote leave for a lot of the similar reasons that were expressed in your video.
So there are concerns in your constituency and in London, do you think, about the levels of immigration at the moment?
I don't think across London you will have the same concern, because there are clearly boroughs, constituencies, probably like Andrews, which have a much more at ease, if you like, with a lot of the changes. Their economy thrives on a very fast-moving population. So I don't think you're going to find the exact same sentiments across London as one piece. But you do, certainly on the edges of London, in the suburbs, a lot of those views that were expressed in your video are widely held.
And Andrew, are you concerned, and are the people of Hammersmith and Fulham concerned about the levels of immigration?
Like Kwasi, I was out yesterday knocking on doors, and I thought, given what we've been told by the media in the last couple of weeks, we'd concentrate on the core labour areas, working class areas, White City, Shepherd's Bush, and overwhelmingly for Remain, even more so than the wealthy middle class parts of it, and a real understanding of the issues as well. And that was very gratifying, I think, because so much myth is talked about immigration. Still over half of immigration is from outside the EU, and it still is the case that there is going to be a lot of. If we want to trade with Europe, then part of the
Could
price
I just ask you, though,
is
do you think there
labour.
is? Are you concerned? Do you think there's too much EU immigration? The levels of EU immigration here in London are too high at the moment.
About 15% of my constituents are EU nationals. Almost 50% were born outside the UK. It is simply part of the cultural mix of London now. Big Polish community, but we've had a big Polish community in West London since just after the Second World War. It honestly is not an issue. I'm not saying it's not an issue. It's not an issue for me and my constituents. I do understand that it is elsewhere, and that's why I'll be trying to maximise the Remain vote from my part of London.
I mean, Andrew said a lot of things, and he talked about that since the Second World War. Of course, no one's talking about since the Second World War. What's happened with the free movement since about 2004 is that hundreds of thousands of people, EU migrants, have come in. Now, to say that this is the normal state of affairs and that we've lived with this for decades is simply not true. The scale of immigration, I mean, I'm the son of immigrants, I know about this subject. The scale of immigration is something completely different to what was the case, certainly in the 50 years after the Second World War up to the turn of the millennium.
But it's also
a completely different order, and to pretend that it's not different is simply to turn a blind face face against the voters.
But
and I think that's it's irresponsible.
You're sort of fighting against history here. There are millions of British people who are also chosen to go and live in Europe.
I don't want to interrupt the flow, but I'm just going to for a moment because we just want to go, we've had a bit on Havering, but let's try and get a bit more from Havering. Our reporter Andrew Cryan is in a pie and mash shop out in Romford. Andrew.
Hi, Tim. Yes, we're in Robin's Pie and Mash, which the people there saw in the film, but I'm joined this time by Councillor Lawrence Webb, leader of the UKIP group here in the council.
Good morning.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very good.
Now, Lawrence, first question. The polls, if they're to be believed, suggest that London is much more leaning towards Remain than Leave. Havering seems very different. Why?
I think because despite the best efforts of the government, we're still able to think for ourselves, and we've decided we want out, and we won't be swayed by Cameron scare tactics.
Is it as simple as that? I mean, for example, you heard in the film there, people say that a lot of the people in Havering are old East Enders. They grew up in the East End. They moved out here, partly because of immigration. They didn't like what had happened. We even heard one person in the film there say that immigrants had lowered the tone of the old East End. Is that how you feel?
Well, I didn't see the BT tape, but we're voting for one thing and one thing alone here, and that is who governs the country. All right? That's the only thing we're voting on. When you speak to people in Havering, you'll find that 10 different people give you 10 different reasons why we're voting to leave. But it's basically who makes the laws that govern this country. That's the one thing we're voting on.
Well, let's get back to that thing you say, you talk to 10 different people, you get 10 different reasons. We spoke to a lot of people. We heard it's everything to do with benefits, the NHS, the price of houses, the state of Romford Market. Now, you're an out campaigner, but you cannot pretend that all those problems will be solved if people vote to leave the EU.
No, but you mentioned immigration. We like to call it the free movement of people because that's what it is in the EU. And there's clearly an impact on the health service, schools, housing. All those things are driven by the numbers of people coming to settle in this country. And the Office of National Statistics, their own figures show that last year 590,000 people from the EU came to settle in the UK, or were at least given national insurance numbers. And why would they need that other than to live, work or claim benefits?
Another question, Lawrence, which is if Havering feels so strongly that it wants to leave the EU, why does that not translate into UKIP votes? Here in the council, you're only the third party. Here in Romford, you managed just over 20% in the last general election. It's not translating into people wanting to vote for you.
But the winning party got 28%, so actually we're not that far behind. And things are progressively moving. It's the first time we'd really fought that hard in Havering to actually win 7 seats from none. It's pretty good, although I had won one in a by-election the previous year.
Why do you think it is, then, that the rest of London is leaning towards Remain, if it is?
Well, you mentioned that yourself. There's a huge demographic change across London. Many of the people in the inner boroughs are perhaps EU citizens, for example, who have come here to improve their lot in life, and nobody can blame them for that, but they're probably not going to vote to leave, are they?
OK, well, Lawrence Webb, thank you very much. Tim, next week I'll be in the London Borough of Lambeth, which, according to that same bit of research that said Havering wanted to leave, claims Lambeth is the place in England that wants to stay in the European Union the most. We'll see you then.
Thank you very much indeed. Kwasi Kwarteng, what's the calculation, and what's your calculation about the impact of immigration? Is the pressure that they put on infrastructure outweighed by the economic benefit they bring?
Think to say that there are no benefits is wrong. Clearly, immigration has been part of Western countries, the world, global population for many years. But to turn your face against overwhelming evidence that it poses pressure on services. Certainly in my constituency, school places are very difficult to find now as a consequence of the weight of the population increase. And if we don't plan for it, this problem won't get easier, it'll get worse.
And you must be seeing that in Hammersmith and Fulham.
Could I just make one comment? The guy from UKIP, I think, probably couldn't answer the question on why London is basically a Remain city. Said, it's all the EU nationals we're voting for it. They don't have a vote in the referendum. I mean, that level of ignorance, I'm afraid.
But the point thank you for that. What about, are there no pressures on infrastructure in Hammersmith and Fulham?
There are pressures on infrastructure because we're not building the houses that we should be. We're building luxury houses. In Old Oak, where your government intends 24,000 houses to be built, the question is, are they going to be affordable? You're demolishing the major hospital in the area when there's an increasing demand for A&E services. Let's put the blame where it lies. It's with a Conservative government which is not prioritising public services.
How would that be a Conservative government? Who was in government towards the end of the 2000s when one had to make plans and preparation for this influx of EU migrants through infrastructure. It began with Labour, didn't it?
Well, absolutely. And can I make a point to that?
Well, you can after I answer the question.
Yeah,
That's an extraordinary thing to say. We are in the process now. We are beginning to build homes. They're not the right type of homes because this government has set exactly the wrong type of target, and indeed the previous mayor, Boris Johnson, was not building affordable homes. This is typical of the Brexit misinformation that we're having.
Let's get this straight.
And Europe's responsible for everything. Let's put the blame where it lies with our own government.
All right,
they want to govern. Why don't they govern properly?
They absolutely admit it. They totally miscalculated the effect of the eastward expansion of the EU. They said there'd be 16,000 people a year. That's the Labour government in 2004 when we extended the EU. And they've admitted, they put their hands up. You read their memoirs, they say we completely got that wrong. Blair, Brown, Darling, they all said that they got this wrong. They miscalculated the number of people. And of course, if you miscalculate the numbers, you're not going to be able to plan. They didn't know there'd be 150,000 people.
When Polish people are coming over here with their education and their graduates and their training and their whatever, all paid for by Poles, they've been trained there. We're getting that for free. Often they're doubling up, not living in particularly fantastic salubrious conditions. They are, you've already conceded, I think, providing a net economic benefit, which we're going to lose.
Forgive me, the point about this argument isn't whether we're going to have immigration or not. The point is how we can control it. And if you have, by mere virtue of having a Bulgarian passport, you have a right to free movement to come into Britain, and in Bulgaria the minimum wage is £1 an hour, of course that's a huge incentive for people to come, and we don't have a choice about that. It's not as if we can look at their CVs and look at their credentials and look at their training. They have an automatic right to come to Britain, and that's where the tension is, and that's where Vote Leave will win if we do win.
London is built on immigrant labour over centuries, not just over centuries.
No, accept that. No one denies that.
You set up something called the Free Enterprise Group, which was famous for saying that British workers were the worst idlers in the world. And the prominent members of that group are people like Liz Truss and Sajid Javid, who are now in the cabinet and are now Remainers. You're increasingly looking like an isolated. Maybe Boris will give you a job. Maybe Boris will give you a job in the cabinet.
I've got plenty of work to do.
Let's move on. It was a central pledge of Sadiq Khan's campaign to freeze transport fares for 4 years. But what exactly did that mean? Well, not all fares. It emerged this week that the new mayor intends it to apply to fares on those Transport for London services for which he's responsible. Raphael Sheridan reports.
Sadiq Khan's manifesto could not be any clearer. On page 8, it said, Londoners won't pay a penny more for their travel in 2020 than they do today. Words which Sadiq Khan reiterated throughout the election campaign. However, just above that was this line, which suggested that it would only apply to Transport for London fares. The question is, why?
I only have the power to set fares on TfL services.
Londoners who only use travel cards or who only use Network Rail services will find the cost of their travel increasing by inflation. And for pay-as-you-go customers, weekly and daily caps will also increase by inflation. It attracted criticism from London Assembly members who believed the mayor had been misleading.
He has been, at the very least, disingenuous in not introducing the caveats during the campaign so that people actually understood what they were voting for.
The freeze is expected to cost £640 million, higher than Sadiq Khan's estimate of £450 million, but significantly lower than Transport for London's £1.9 billion estimate. So, after a short honeymoon, has Sadiq Khan's post-election momentum hit the buffers?
Qazi Kwarteng, has it?
I think Sadiq is a very skillful politician. He said lots of things on the campaign trail. He even contradicted himself on the campaign trail. I mean, if you look at his endorsement of Corbyn to win the nomination to beat Tessa Jowell, who was seen as the Blairite candidate, and then he turned on Corbyn in the run-up to the actual election because he realised that Corbyn wasn't particularly popular among swing voters.
Do you think that's misleading, though? He controls TfL fares, as you know, on TfL services. Was it misleading?
I don't know what was going through his mind, but clearly there's some mismatch between what he's saying now and what he said before the election.
The public's perhaps misunderstanding or the Conservatives' misunderstanding because no one seemed to ask the question or raise it?
Well, they should have done. I mean, that was probably an oversight in our campaign, but he clearly has backtracked or shifted his position from where he was before the election.
Let's ask Andrew, can there be any doubt in Londoners' minds, or was there any doubt in Londoners' minds when they went to the polls that they were being promised a freeze? Londoners would not pay a penny more when they travelled within London for 4 years.
Can we just deal with facts on this? You've got £640 million. It is higher than the estimate, but it's a third of what Zach Goldsmith, who was going to put fares up by 17% over the 4 years, said it would cost.
It's really helpful.
That
but
£640 million will be coming through better running.
This might be helpful. It might be helpful background, and we had some of that in the film. Could Londoners have been in any doubt from Sadiq Khan that they weren't going to pay any more, even if they were going?
So far, exactly what he said, and exactly what he can do.
Even if he was going on the, even if they were travelling on the railways, and even if they were buying travel cards, did those people, were they entitled to believe that they weren't going to pay any more, Andrew?
I don't think this is being reported properly. So everything he can do that's within his power, he is doing, and he will do more, provided that the train companies and the government cooperate with him.
That's fine. Do you think he should have perhaps clarified this
before? If he can transfer South East and South West trains over to the control for TfL, who I think will run it better, if the government will get tough with the train companies, if the train companies will do what he's doing,
there's a lot of verbiage and lots of ifs.
Then it will be the case that...
Forgive me.
I've had a try. Quasi, you have a go.
Yeah, there's a lot of verbiage. There's clearly a mismatch. There's clearly a mismatch. You've spoken a lot, and lots of ifs and lots of conditional clauses, but there's clearly a mismatch between there's going to be a freeze and then the price is going to go up.
How can he do what's not within his control?
A 10-year-old can see that there is a mismatch. I'm not saying he's contradicted himself or he lied, but I am saying there is clearly a mismatch between what he promised before the election.
But presumably, one reason why the Conservatives didn't point this out was because it would have highlighted the fact then we would have all asked, well, is the government going to guarantee to freeze the element of the rail fares coming in, which aren't owned, and of course, the government wouldn't have done that, would they?
I don't want to rerun the campaign. I don't know why we didn't say that. But clearly, if a candidate says there's going to be a freeze, and then he announces that there won't be a freeze, there is a problem. The voters have in some way been misdirected.
Andrew, do you think, can I just say, put this, do you think you can be a little bit too clever, by half in a campaign? We've had a suggestion of this with housing as well, but it seemed pretty clear to people that it was going to be all fares.
He's done everything within his power. He will do more if the government will cooperate with him. The average family is going to save £200. He's giving back £640 million to Londoners, and that money is not coming off investment.
Are you saying that had been too complicated to explain to Londoners before the election?
I think that was explained, and you've seen that was clearly in the material that was going out.
Is not complicated. That's very clear.
The pressure is now on the government to do what Sadiq is doing, which is to freeze fares within their control.
Exactly, and say for those people coming in from your constituency into London, appeal to the Chancellor, Department of Transport now to freeze the rail fares as well.
We do that all the time.
Would you like to see this happen this year?
We do that all the time.
No.
Okay.
Within the constraints of the budget. But a freeze is very different from an increase.
Let the government do their part.
To you both. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.